So, thank you very much. Is this microphone working for you? Is it turned up? Because I've got a wireless one. How are we doing? Oh, it's getting there. Either that or there's aliens coming in. Brilliant. I'm my stomach. Right, we'll make a start because I tend to move about. How's our IT person? Or should I stand over here? Was it that easy, or was it? So that should finish. I'll work from here, wherever the IT person is, okay? Is that right? Good. And I'll speak up too. Right, let's start again. Hi, so I'm Steve Jenkinson. I'm here to chat about particularly walkers with dogs, because that's something that comes up quite often. And it's really great to be here doing the first in-person event for some time. If I stand here, can everybody hear me without a microphone? Brilliant, thank you. There we go. So I specialise in managing people and their dogs in the outdoors. And it's a bit unusual where I came from, so just to give you a little bit of background to this. Oh, thank you, okay, there we are. So now it's like X Factor or something. So how did I become to be the dog guy or the dog poo guy, as often, but it's always better to be remembered than not. So I started off, this is like my career, about 40 years ago, I started in the NHS. I've got a real connection with people and health and that sort of thing. But even then, I wanted to do stuff with the outdoors, so then 10 years after, I got into access management and rights of way and national parks and all that sort of stuff. Then about 20 years ago, I just thought, this thing with dogs in the outdoors, surely we can do it a lot better. And that got me really interested in how we do all that. So I went and studied the psychology of people and their pets at the University of Southampton. And so I ended up as being this specialist. I bring these three bits and pieces together. And so now I work for a range of organisations, because I'm self-employed. So from the Kennel Club, I work for about a day a week to do some mentoring with some of the wildlife trusts, doing a lot of work for Natural England on the England Coast Path work and how we design that. Dorset Dogs, who are great, I've worked for them for 16 years. Forestry England, doing some audits for them at the moment, and I also do some online training and stuff to keep it tidy. And I make that point not just to show my CV, but the fact that good management benefits everybody, whether I'm working for the puppy huggers, or whether it's the curlew huggers, or whatever it may be. Good management of walkers with dogs benefits everybody. And this is something you can tell I've got a passion for, because as a kid I didn't do all those kind of things like, football and all those, gender stereotypes of blokes. I just wanted to get out in the outdoors, and I used to go out to where my granddad has his racing greyhounds and just walk the dogs in the woods and that sort of thing, because I just had a passion for it. So what's changed now, apart from a significant lack of hair compared to that one, but maybe a better haircut? So now I live in the Orkney Islands in the north of Scotland. I have a 25-acre croft there, which returned from being predominantly ryegrass to these traditional meadows that we have, where I'm really proud to have things like nesting curlew, golden plover, that sort of thing, and also Lochen, where we've got some red-throated divers. But also I love dogs too, and that's Teal, my dog who came from Dorset. And the key point I make there, that even on my own land, there's places where I don't even go, even without my dog. So it's this whole balance of me is actually, how do we do both? So just to give you a bit of context there. So looking at the past then, because we're talking about past, present and future, and this is going to be some quite high-level stuff, but if you want to ask some detail, you can do that in the workshop sessions this afternoon. In fact, there's going to be this board up later on over lunch, and you can come and write some questions on it, and we'll make sure we collate those and work through them, and there's a panel as well. But just about 20 years ago, this was a heading that was in the then English Nature Sightlines magazine, something that went out to the managers of all special scientific interest. And it was this dogs pose biggest threat to wildlife. And this is why I call it the past, we saw them as the pets of the devil, if you like, because that's how they were talked about. And yet, if you look on here, this is from formatting, some other things are going off the edge a wee bit, but this was about the same time from the then English Nature, which was listing all the reasons why sites of special scientific interest, that's why I like to say special places for nature, because it's a lot better, easier to use. But we can see that public access in all its individual forms, and that's just not walkers with dogs, but people on motorbikes and all sorts of things, was accounting for about 3% of those being not in favourable condition. Land management issues about overgrazing, moor burn, drainage, all these sort of things were all important too. And we need to remember that habitat loss is a really, really important thing. That's not to diminish the public access stuff, but we need to have this in context. And I remember having a chat with a really fairly outspoken landowner who was really vociferous about all the problems with dogs. And then I find out the following week in the paper that he was prosecuted for damaging the triple SI. So it's this, how do we make all these things work together? So then I wondered, actually, are we just really rubbish at this in the UK? Can we learn from doing things elsewhere? So I went and did literature search, like we always do if we're trying to move things on. And this paper caught my eye. This came from near Melbourne in Australia. And this was basically, this is the sort of thing that we can get really excited about. Unauthorised human use of an urban coastal wetland sanctuary, current and future patterns, you know, because it's so snappy, but it's really, really important paper. And a lot of these things still get quoted. And basically it was talking about people walking their dogs where it was sensitive for ground nesting birds, waders, this sort of thing. And traditionally, as it was then, it was just saying, oh, well, the things that we need to do is stop public access or build bigger fences and all these sort of things. It was the walkers with dogs that were the problem. And this was the prevailing approach. And I went out on site and met with some of the authors of the paper, which was really good. And this is a site of the site in itself. So what you've got here is you've got these really new houses built here, say, and then in the middle you've got these salt pans, which are really good for some of the birds that are nesting. You can see some of the eggs there. And then beyond it is this beautiful beach. And this is the image that's being sold to these people buying these houses that, you know, turn right and you'll never look back. So basically you're buying this house with the promise of these really brilliant beaches, but in between them is this really sensitive area that was just being fenced off. And initially people would say, oh, that's just a problem with dog walkers. But what would we say the problem is actually now, knowing what we know about what we do in the UK? Yeah, I just heard it that. It's an issue of bad planning. If we just talk about the dog walkers, that's actually just a symptom of bad planning. The real cause, and this is the one where I'm always asking why, is actually why did that happen? And it's because they don't think about things like we do now. But often, you know, it's really easy. I know in local government, when I was working there, we were really good at saying no, aren't we? We could do it in lots of really creative ways. Like, you know, just this one with no dogs, or dogs not on leave will be shot. This one I really like. These lands are poisoned for the protection of animals. That was to keep walkers with dogs off, but some of you will maybe get the irony there. No dogs on the recreation ground, but if you think you've got problems on some of your sites, think of this place where we've got alcoholic chain-smoking dogs on skateboards. So just keep a bit of perspective here to know that things are okay. But we're really good at saying no. But no is not necessarily helping us to find out what's yes. Because sometimes when you used to speak to people and they'd say, well, why don't we just use the law and then basically the problem will go away? But does it happen that easily? We know it doesn't. That's why we're all here today, because there's more than just saying use the law. And if it was that easy, we'd be doing things very differently. So while I was out in Australia, I went to look at another thing, because around Sydney, for 15 miles either side of the city centre, there was nowhere where you could walk your dogs on the beach. And this was hailed as a really great thing for nature conservation. And I went to visit a number of the local authorities there and said, so why does your bit of coast have no dogs allowed at any time of year? And some would say, oh, it's for public amenity, which is fine, because it's absolutely fine for some people to have beaches where there's not dogs. And others would say, oh, there's fairy penguins, and they put their eggs in the beach at the top, and then when all the chicks come out, you know, they can get attacked by dogs and stuff. Yeah, really fine. And then there were some which were maybe more well-intentioned, but I wasn't quite sure about the history or the stats of saying, if you have more dogs on the beach, you'll get more shark attacks. Not something that we commonly have in Scotland, so I didn't feel I could comment particularly on that, but it's like, okay. So they said, yeah, this is brilliant. And then I went to look and see what was happening, and actually there were dog walkers on these beaches. And so I went up to a few of them and chatted and said, oh, okay, do you walk on here often? Yes. And I said, well, there's no dogs restriction. He said, yeah, there is for all the beaches. And I live here, I live close to the beach, so I'm not given an option of where to go. So I just go to the nearest bit and just account for saying every year I'll pay $80 in fines, because I'm not being given anywhere else to go. They would have tried to do the right thing, but all the beaches were no dogs. So actually it didn't work in reality, but when you read it, it sounds really good, because we've got all these no dog bans on 30 miles of beaches. Similarly in San Francisco, so this is a city where we have more dogs than children, so in Northern California. And again, there's actually a book about the dogs and nature conflict here called Fury Unleashed, which is a good read if you want to look at it. And again, so here, the issue is that the National Park Service, who have some of the most sensitive sites, don't have any engagement with the local councils. So they're all just pushing people from one place to another. And so this, what would have been a really nice tune system, you can just see us all down to the substrate. I was here in the summer, and the stink of dog urine was really terrible. And it just didn't work well for anybody. And in fact, it was so bad and so small that people were still going to the sensitive areas. So again, they hadn't really got it sorted. So all these things actually bring me to the conclusion, actually we're doing some really, really good stuff, and we are leading with it. And that's on the basis of seeing what's done elsewhere. But often people say, oh, we don't do it so well. But actually, we do a really good job. So to the future, well, to the current, sorry. And I kind of call this coming out the kennel. Because when I first started doing this, people would come up to me and say, oh, that was really good. I actually have a dog. I love birds as well, but I actually have a dog. We don't tell you, I want to be a safe place. And this is why I actually call it that people started coming out of the kennel, that it was okay to like wildlife and to like dogs too. And this is just a screen grab from a Zoom meeting I was doing this in the Dorset Dogs people, and here we are, like, openly having dogs and loving wildlife. And this is the great thing, and this is what we're doing. It's not a people versus nature or dogs versus nature. It's finding spaces for both. And you probably maybe see some of the people here, I think, today. I would say, though, before we start engaging with members of the public and using all the sort of applied psychology and stuff that I do, that actually, if we can just do it with infrastructure, that's the first port of call. Because actually trying to engage with somebody and then educate them and then trying to say what behaviour we want and then getting them to do it and monitor it is a lot of different steps. Whereas if by good design we can just make sure, as in here, that actually if people are walking along here, this is Newport Wetlands in South Wales, actually just maintaining a nice low hedge with a fence behind it stops people going through there into the area for ground nesting birds at the back. Sorted. So always, and also making sure that your messaging is clear about what you want, and making sure that different organisations like the District Council and the Mitigation team or the Rights of Way team are all saying the same thing, because that can often be a problem too. So let me just do a little survey here. How many people here have driven a car in the last 6 months? So everybody, I know that sometimes there'll be somebody with a folding bike at the back and really virtuous and stuff, and good for you if you're here. You can polish your halo and be first in the food queue. Thank you. So of those of you who've driven, how many of you in that last 6 months have never exceeded the speed limit? God, there's really somebody, you know, the class squad, somebody can pop that. Oh, well, we're your hand there. Okay, we'll just note it. Okay, so how many of you, on the other hand, know that speed limits are imposed by fascist traffic planners at the District Council just to get in your way of your day-to-day life, and actually you know how fast you can go because you've got brilliant driving skills. Anybody like that? Okay, so, oh yeah, we're on the back, very good. So extra pudding for you, so good to see that honesty. And so then, how many of us actually know the rules, and we've taken a test, and we've read the book, but still sometimes we go faster than we ought? Right, a room full of normal people, plus some outliers, okay, that's fine, and we love you all. And why I make that point is that, in essence, we've got three groups of people. We've got the angels, who will always do what they tell us, great. And we've got these devils, who are the people that, irrespective of engagement, whatever we do, probably formal legal action is the only good way to influence them. And some of the discussions we've had about how we engage with people often have gone on the outliers. You know, people say, oh, I know this person, and they never want their dog off the lead. Well, that may be. We know about 15% of people that's an issue. And equally, somebody will say, oh, we did all this, but then there was this person who came with this great Dane or whatever, blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be those outliers. And let's get rid of the devils anyway. Okay, there we go. But actually, there was fallen angels, people like us, who have read the leaflet and have done the test just as much as sometimes we say, oh, we did this leaflet about birds, and people read it, but they still did something different. But actually, we know that every day 4 people are killed on UK's roads, and speed is part of that, and yet we still don't do it. So let's not try and expect people to be far different in terms of walks with dogs than we are with something that actually devastates families every day. But if we know that actually, if we give people, those angels and those fallen angels, opportunities to do the right thing, they will, because they don't want hassle. They want, as we heard earlier on, they just want to enjoy a walk in the outdoors. They are not getting up in the morning and thinking, you know what, I hate bloody curlews. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to take my dog and you're going to have beak, that curvy beak and stuff, I hate them and all that noise. They don't, they just want to walk their dog. But sometimes we talk like the curlew haters, and I have curlews on mine and I love them. But you know, they love nature. And let's always remember that. And this was some work that was done by Walk Unlimited for Birdway Summit, which is really good. And I just love this, because some of the questions that were asked, there were things about, yes, people like their dogs on me, but for 84%, what are you most looking for in a walk? It's like, my dog can run around, yes, but without causing trouble. Because that's the experience that they want. It's not they want to, they cause problems. So how do we work with this inherent, goodness to just have, if you like, happy, healthy, hassle-free walks, hassle-free for the walk with dogs, and hassle-free for the wildlife as well. Because in essence, if we're looking to restrict where people go and what they do, there's one of 4 options. They can either keep coming to your site, so that might be, for example, that you've got it zoned so that people with some on-lead areas, some off-lead areas, or it might be that it's totally inappropriate on that site and they can just go somewhere else, or they could just ignore what you've said because there's little chance of enforcement, or it might be that they wrote to the politicians and your managers and it all just gets blown up in a really bad way. And really, if we want to manage things well, we need to be looking at those first two. Either keep visiting if their needs are still met, or go somewhere else. But we need to be active and help people make those good choices, not just assume that they will disappear like the Labrador that we saw earlier. And this example from North America I really like, because people who say, oh, in North America it's great, because even if you step off the path, you can be fined. You know, it's very restricted, because the national parks, for example, in North America, we don't have people living in them like we have in the UK. But actually here in Banff, there was still a community there who wanted to walk their dogs. And actually what was happening is they were walking the dogs where they shouldn't do, but also putting them at risk of predation from things like coyotes, mountain lions, that sort of thing. But they still wanted to walk their dogs. And what the actual National Park Service did was provide what we might call now a sign. So it was a big fenced-in forest where they could walk their dogs, and that was what they wanted. And interestingly, because probably in North America, particularly in the Rockies, is that the coyotes have a bit of a evolved to actually send one coyote out, and then the person walking the dog off lead chases the coyote, the dog chases the coyote, and it goes to the pack, and all the other coyotes get on it and kill the dog. So actually, these are just hanging around like, damn, they're on the other side of this fence. I just hasten to add that coyotes are not indigenous in the UK, so anybody thinking that we'll just reintroduce coyotes and that's going to sort out a dog walking problem, that's not going to really work. But that's good. So how do we make people make these good decisions? This is something like Brighton and Hove Council do, where they've got conservation grazing in and around the city. And it's just you can go online or follow Twitter to just see where the sheep are now, where they're going to be in the future, where they've been taken away, so that even before people leave home, they can make good decisions about how can I have a hassle-free walk with my dog. Similarly, one of these things that actually making dog walkers part of the solution, so here they're wanting to have the sheep grazing, but they didn't council have the money to have shepherds out all the time. So it's actually, who are the people who are going to see if the water trough is empty or if a sheep's got stuck on its back? It's the dog walkers, just like they tend to find the dead bodies too, and that's not causal linkage, so it happens that they find them when they're not there. So engaging with the dog walkers to actually be the shepherds and keep an eye on the sheep, wow! How crazy is that? But it's just how we approach and engage with people, because they really value these green spaces too. And of course, there's the stuff that Dorset Dogs are maybe biased, but brilliant in terms of what they're doing. And in my workshop, we'll have Annika from Dorset Dogs there, so we can learn some more from that. But here, and I think Thames Basin Heaths have been doing this, we're actually getting dog walkers to be first eyes and ears to actually report fires. Because for all the problems that dogs could do, if you've got a fire going through that heathland, that's just knackered it, to use the technical ecological expression. And so actually, how do we get them and help them feel part of it? Because then you've got that narrative that you can talk about the birds and all these sorts of things as well. And also we've got suitable alternative natural green spaces. My clients in Dorset, where people just want to go here, not because they think, I really care about the birds, but actually this bit of green space, this one was formerly a golf course, is just a really brilliant place to walk my dog. And they want to go there, so you don't need to be doing enforcement or anything like that particularly, because they just want to go there. And for every person walking here, they're not walking on Heathland, which is a really great thing to see. So what about the future? And particularly today on Armistice Day, I wanted to just take you through this example, which I find really inspiring about the future. Because this is a project that I worked on in this really brilliant area in Europe. Beautiful, lots of wildlife and natural low-intensity farming and stuff. And the other thing you found when you walked there, this was about 13 years ago when I was there, is also landmines, because this is Bosnia. And this is where in my lifetime we had the civil war between 1992 and 1995, and also then I was thinking that'd be the last one, but of course we've got Ukraine there as well, although not a civil war. And quite apart from that, so people not being able to walk where they might or even farm their land because of landmines, which might possibly all be gone by 2027, if we're lucky. We also had the situation where if you're going into a shop, this was a car hire place, that actually not going in with a revolver was as important to communicate as not going in with a dog. So you can tell that there's a number of issues there. A really beautiful, fantastic place. And here's some of the issues we've got. So this is the local dump that I went to see. And these are dogs that are just living and breeding there, and really hard to take a picture like this and then just come away and not thinking, I want to save those, just as much as when I see the starving puffins washed up on the beach last winter. But equally, you have community dogs, which are not technically strays, they all live somewhere, but the culture there is that, oh, the dogs just go out for the day and they just bum around town. And here it's great because this supermarket put these automatic opening doors, so the dogs could just go into the village and then it's like, oh yeah, we've got fancy some sausages. Yeah, so they walk up to the door and the doors are open. And that's another thing we won't need to think about in terms of mitigation, about unintended consequences of what's happening. But we've got these people who have still got landmines and still suffering from civil war, which you notice just when you look around the place to see the number of amputees going around the towns and villages. And the farmers and the hunters and the police and the dog wardens and the dog lovers and all these people could get together, just like we do with flip charts. This is work that was funded by the United Nations Development Programme, who asked me to go and do some work with them and help facilitate some of that, to get together and do it. And to be honest, if these people who are in this situation can sort that out, and dogs are important enough, and wildlife and farming, it makes us look pretty pathetic if actually we can't get together and sort these things out. So I find this really inspirational. So talking about working together and across borders and all this sort of thing, it brings us nicely to Brexit. And when I was talking to Michael 18 months ago, it's like, oh, let's think what might be a challenge in the future, because a lot of our work in this room is underpinned by the Birds and Habitats directives that people, that came from Europe. I'm sorry it's not the most up-to-date picture of the Prime Minister, but we're just changing so much. But anyway, so there's this whole thing, and I've outed myself as a Guardian reader. Obviously it's tofu and lives, well, not North London, but North London. But there's this whole thing about what's underpinning the work that we do, because there's a lot that's based on that Birds and Habitats directives. And it surprises me that actually, because I do some media work as well, that actually there's a quite populist story here, which we might want to be in denial about, but I mocked up anyway, one or two of them. So if we were saying there was a tabloid paper called the Daily Whale, no intention to relate to any other one, what if we had these headlines? Because these could be true, like flock off, immigrant feathered fiends force house price hike, because we know in some places people are paying more for their houses to pay for mitigation. You know, at a time when mortgage rates are going up. This is a populist story, which is a real danger if it got out there. Equally, another one I had some fun with this, you can tell. We'll fly them on the beaches. Outrageous foreign birds, because these aren't ours, they're not British birds like my sparrow or robin or whatever. You know, but these foreign birds are coming over and making our traditional bulldogs and stuff not being able to walk on the beach. We know that this isn't all strictly true, but this is how it gets in the popular press, so we need to be mindful of that. And this is actually, for one local authority I work with, these were the protest walks that they had on the beaches when they tried to do some very extensive and, in my view, excessive restrictions, actually worked around it. I'd much rather work with people to avoid that, those protest marches happening. So then if we're thinking, what if, I'm not wanting to scare you, just as you're going too much, because I think there's lots of good stuff, but if your project ended in 23, because actually there was another change in Prime Minister or other people got in and said, let's get rid of the Birds and Habitats directives, how would you assess how enduring your programme is going to be? Would it be thinking about bird populations or number of leaflets or those sort of things? And there'll be some great stuff that Footprint Ecology will bring out about monitoring, and that you can go to their workshop, because there's some brilliant data and big data that we're getting from there. Well, it might be, but to me these are all just steps in the process. To me, what really matters, if we're trying to work with people, as we heard this morning, this might be about birds and dogs, but actually it's a people management issue. It's a people management issue. And it's come off a little off the side again, but this saying which you often hear, but it's saying people will forget, you might forget what you've said, people forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I think we really need to remember that, because there's all sorts of data in birds, but it's how do you make them feel. We heard this morning about that environment and that connection, and thanks for building that up at the start there, thank you very much. So which of these are going to be the more enduring if you've got your visitors? And these are from some surveys that I looked at, and we're going to get you done very shortly to lunch. Is it that when the people you've engaged with, they say, oh, they made me feel I was being watched and judged when I was walking my dog here? Or I walk my dog here in the evenings because the ranger's gone home and because I have nowhere else to go, because they've just said, don't walk your dog here, I'll never let it off lead. Or is it that that person didn't care about my dog, so why should I compare about his birds? And these are how people, not because they're curlew haters, but just it's that empathy and that mutual understanding, not what you want, but how do the other people want when we're trying to influence them. Or is it these kind of feelings? So like, for example, the range legitimised, well, I've come to this beach for 30 years with my dog, because sometimes we're asking people to do stuff differently, And you say, oh, it's really important now. But they've been doing these things for decades, and their families have before. It's just like, oh, okay, I didn't know. And they're doing it because they're passionate about these things. Or she gave me options to plan to play fetch with my dog and to help keep this place special. Or they made me feel welcome in my green space, and then I became an advocate for it because I was included and feeling valued. So in essence, just to summarise this session, and nice to see you all awake and thinking of your lunch, or maybe being inspired, I think probably the former rather than the latter, is that all the work that I do is, and this builds on what we've heard this morning, so I guess it's a nice summary, is that how do we promote the benefits of people walking their dogs? It makes them care about the environment and gives them better physical and mental health. But at the same time, how do we reduce those negative impacts? And actually, by doing both, it makes for a much more engaging and positive narrative with them than just seeing them as the problem. And thinking about how do we promote happy, healthy and hassle-free walks. And that's just for both people with their dogs and for the wildlife and other people and livestock too. How do we get to that sweet spot? And the final slide I have for you is actually COVID has told us a lot about this because there's a movement internationally called One Health. And this is saying that actually human health is dependent on the health of the environment, and that's also dependent on the health of both our wild animals and our kept animals. And you bring all those together. And this is in essence what we want to be doing because we care about all these things. And the great thing if you're doing all these projects and you want to drip in One Health to your committee report or whatever, is that there's always going to be more money for human health than there is for wildlife, just in terms of political priorities. So actually if we can say that in the back of our mind, oh, this is about helping curlew or dunlin or turnstone or whatever, but actually we say this is a way to also be helping people be more active, more often, in this environment, that's going to push a lot more funding buttons, which might be really more important. But I'd say also think about yourselves, because we're all passionate about these things, and we need to look after ourselves first, and we sometimes forget that, but if we're passionate about these things, and you can tell I'm moderately passionate about this subject, but we need to look after ourselves as well, in whatever way that is, whether it's walking our dog, going out with our telescope, or whatever it is, and watching birds, and then we can actually work for the environment, and to make it a better place for everybody, whether it's 2 legs or 4. So thank you very much.